In honor of Black History Month, I had mentioned that I wanted to call the ancestors forward by giving them, paying homage to them and their contributions. And the ancestors I was referring to are probably less known outside of New York, unless people lived in New York at one point. But they were Harlem icons, in terms of educating people on African history. And the name of those people were Brother Bill Jones and his wife, Sister Kefa. Lucille Jones is her birth name. And they were two elders that started a movement called the First World Alliance. And what the First World Alliance was it was a series of lectures that were put on weekly, bringing in some of our African scholars over the years. Just about every African scholar that most people could think about came through First World Alliance because it was that popular. They started the organization, or they started the project of First World Alliance. One, because Brother Bill Jones said that the fact that we were constantly hearing about Africa and other nations of color being called third world nations, he wanted to point out the fact that a lot of the firsts, the oldest bones found in Africa, some of the oldest studies, educational studies, mathematics, science, philosophy, architecture, things of that nature, came out of Africa, or is documented as being the original in Africa, as well as civilizations, the first civilizations. There's a saying that history starts when things are written down, and that's one of the reasons why Egypt is so important to African history. One is in Africa, but also a lot of the things that came out of Egypt were brought, as Dr. Ben taught us, were brought through educational teachings from Nubia, lower south, the south of Egypt, and brought down the Nile. And I say down the Nile because the Nile flows from south to north. So it was brought down the Nile to Egypt, and then civilization culminated there, where they started writing it down and documenting it with various, temples, tombs, and writings. So Brother Bill and Sister Kefa started this First World Alliance, which was a lecture series that they held in a church every weekend, and they had people like, it started with Dr. Ben. Their studies actually started when they saw Dr. Ben on Gil Noble's Like It Is. And they were encouraged by him talking about the African origin of civilization and of religion and a lot of other things. And they started reading, and they actually reached out to him, and he started actually giving them instructions on books to read and counseling them on some of the educational information. And so they were so empowered by the information that they wanted to share it with people. And as elders, they started this. And the reason it impresses me so much is because that undertaking is an undertaking that's very difficult and stressful for anyone, any age. But they did this as older people, where they booked the church, they set it up, they booked speakers to come in, they made sure that the speakers had accommodations, they held the lectures, they cleaned up, they did everything on a weekly basis on limited funds, because the dissemination of the information was the most important thing to them. And when I say limited funds, there was a $5 recommended donation. But if you came there and you had no money, you were still let in. And I know that personally, because I remember coming one time and realizing I didn't have any money, and they didn't hesitate. They just waved me in. And although people like myself would come back, another week and pay double or pay more than we had to, just because of the information that they provided was so empowering, it's a testament to the African nature of giving that they had, in terms of not turning anyone away for financial reasons and being preoccupied with making sure that the information was given out to the public.
Well, they talked about some of the people that were there speaking besides Dr. Ben. I mean, it said Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was there speaking. Dr. Amos Wilson was there speaking. Dr. John Henry Clark was there speaking. So You
President
know,
McIntyre spoke there often. It was impressive because anyone who came to New York knew that that was a home. It was someplace for them to come and feel comfortable disseminating the information that they had about African culture. Carol Barnes, who wrote The Chemical Key, Melanin, The Chemical Key to Greatness, he spoke there. Asa Hilliard, um, Edward Bruce Bynum, Dr. Joy DeGruy, Francis Cress Welsing, Regent Adelaide Sanford. Anyone who's read anything about African history and hears these names knows it's sort of like when people go to a concert. These are the rock stars of African history. Educating you on psychology, sociology, history, medicine. Everything that they gave was giving you information that was not common knowledge because a lot of it was hidden, but it was information that was documented. They gave you references to read. I can't tell you how many of them had lists of things that came up during their lectures where you just had to have a pad and paper writing down stuff so that you could get that book and read some more about what they were talking about. And that's what education is supposed to be. It's supposed to spur you on to getting more information about, or getting an interest so that you get more information about some of the concrete historical information.
the sad thing that I see from this situation is that, as you mentioned, that they were already elders when they started this particular process. But where was the process to keep it going? That's the part that I find sad, that there was no one to step into the gap, to fill the gap, to keep this thing going. And I'm wondering to myself, why was that? Why didn't that happen? I mean, I'm not asking you that particular question, but I'm asking that to the universe. Why didn't that happen? If this was such a wonderful and great thing, and people embraced it and were educated, and they moved forward to educate other people, why didn't they continue the process?
Yeah, and you know what? I think a problem that I see is I think a lot of people in the peripheral aspect are not understanding the importance of this information. And I'm not just saying in terms of feel good, oh, yeah, we had accomplishments, that kind of thing, but I'm saying what this information does for you internally in your everyday life. An individual, a friend of mine, who actually got me to start really reading about African history back in '93, used to say that I gave him headaches because I was constantly coming up with excuses as to why you couldn't get this deep into African history. I was saying, well, people can't afford to buy some books. Sometimes they're just basically putting a roof over their head, or people don't have time because they're working two jobs and blah, blah. And I really believed that for a long time, but it wasn't until I really started reading the information and recognized how empowering it is and how it changes your life for the better, just knowing this information. One, as you read some of the information and recognized the greatness of African people and their ancestors, a lot of the information that you heard in everyday life on the news about, certain people of color couldn't accomplish these tests, or couldn't pass these tests, or people in the inner city were having problems with this and that, and you recognize that it didn't even make sense. You understood how much was accomplished and how many civilizations, both within and outside of the culture, have benefited from the education that comes out of the African history. And once you heard that, anytime you heard anything that was negative or stereotypical or just baseless in fact, it kind of brushed off you just didn't even give it a second thought. It didn't make any sense to you, and you brushed it off as if somebody told you the sky is green. And that's what I think people didn't understand, that you need to have concrete factual information to counter some of the negativity, the stereotypes, the bigotry, the prejudice, and things that you encounter in everyday life, where false media advertising, false political statements, things of that nature just don't really affect you as negatively as they would if you didn't really know the information.